Barnaby Cogswell's workshop was a testament to his three great loves: engineering, solitude, and extreme pessimism. Nestled deep in the Whisperwood, the small stone cottage was barely visible beneath a dense, protective canopy of self-propelled razor wire vines and automated nettle launchers. The primary entrance, deceptively styled as a whimsical mushroom-shaped door, was guarded by a sequence of 27 distinct deterrents, including the whirling wrench launcher, Level 1, designed to stun. The pit of perpetual pumpernickel, Level 6, designed to mildly irritate. The calibrated cranial concussion canopy, Level 22, designed to deter persistent sales gnomes. Barnaby, a gnome whose beard was perpetually singed and whose spectacles were always slightly askew, was hunched over his latest creation, a perpetual motion generator fueled entirely by the residual guilt of inefficient government bureaucracy. It was a masterpiece of intricate clockwork, and it required absolute, uninterrupted silence. "Almost there," Barnaby muttered, his small, precise hands adjusting a microscopic brass lever. The air in the workshop, a cozy, chaotic blend of oiled gears, burnt gunpowder, and slightly sour tea, vibrated with tension. Click. Ting. Success. He leaned back in his chair, basking in the glow of perpetual guilt-fueled power. It was the calmest moment he'd had all month. The calm lasted precisely 3 seconds. Crunch, twang, zing. The sound came from outside the workshop door, a rapid-fire symphony of metallic tension and surprising human resilience. Barnaby. "Oh, my stars! What a fascinating structural feature." A bright, startlingly cheerful voice chirped from somewhere near the razor wire. Barnaby shot out of his chair, knocking over a stack of blueprints labeled Self-Sealing Sardine Can V 4.0. "Fascinating structural feature? That's the maneuverable misfortune mesh. It's designed to shred anything larger than a chipmunk." He rushed to the heavy iron viewing port, cranked open the aperture, and peered out. What he saw was a disaster unfolding with balletic grace. A gnome woman, no taller than himself, was standing directly on the path. She had sunshine yellow hair pinned back with a tiny trowel, wore thick, sensible leather trousers, and was currently attempting to excavate a series of embedded spikes with a tiny brush, as if they were fossils. This was Penelope Glimmerfoot, an archaeologist with a reputation for both unparalleled enthusiasm and truly catastrophic clumsiness. As Barnaby watched in horrified slow motion, Penelope leaned in to get a better look at a particularly vicious-looking iron spike. She tripped on a rogue root, her arms flailed, and her elbow struck the hidden trigger of the whirling wrench launcher. Clang! A wrench spun past her ear. "Ooh, a projectile-based defense!" Penelope exclaimed, dusting herself off with a smile that could melt glaciers. "Standard perimeter defense, but the rotational calibration is truly superb. It must be protecting something ancient." She then instinctively leaned back to admire the rotational calibration and tripped over a moss-covered patch of earth, which was, in fact, the hidden release for the pit of perpetual pumpernickel. The ground beneath her opened with a soft hiss, and Penelope tumbled into a shallow cavity, which promptly filled with slightly stale rye bread. "Oh, marvelous! A compressed biomass containment system!" she cried, emerging from the pit coated in sourdough crumbs and beaming. "Such an eco-friendly deterrent. The ingenuity is astounding." Barnaby could feel the veins in his temple throbbing. He didn't know whether to yell at the woman for being a persistent idiot or marvel at the fact that she had treated his deadly booby traps like a poorly maintained museum exhibit. His indecision was fatal. Penelope, now focused on cleaning pumpernickel from her spectacles, stepped directly onto the pressure plate of the calibrated cranial concussion canopy, sproing. A heavily padded, spring-loaded arm swung down from the trees, striking Penelope squarely on the head. The gnome merely staggered a step, shook her head, and looked up at the mechanism. Goodness! A non-lethal kinetic shunt. Someone here is a genius. And they clearly love history. This whole property is an active archaeological dig. Penelope clapped her hands together in delight, a movement that accidentally snagged the razor wire vines. With a horrific sound of grinding gears and tearing metal, the entire maneuverable misfortune mesh was completely disabled, falling to the ground in a pathetic, tangled heap. Barnaby's beloved perimeter defenses, a decade of meticulous, spiteful engineering, were gone, and the door was now open. Penelope stepped over the ruined metal mesh, her face alight with excitement. She paused on the threshold, giving the mushroom-shaped door a warm, respectful nod. "Hello? Genius inventor, or perhaps forgotten curator?" She called out cheerfully. "I apologize for the incidental deactivation of your fascinating security apparatus. I assure you, it was purely for research purposes." Barnaby stood stock still, hands curled into fists, vibrating with a level of internal fury that could power a small village. This woman had invaded his sanctum, destroyed his art, and apologized for it with the blinding optimism of a freshly buffed brass engine. "You," Barnaby hissed. Stepping into the light, his voice low and dangerous, "are an unmitigated disaster." Penelope's eyes, magnified slightly behind her thick lenses, widened in delight when they landed on Barnaby. "Oh, you must be the curator. Barnaby Cogswell. I recognize your design flair. The whirling wrench launcher has that unique asymmetrical winding pattern only seen in your early 18th century sketches." "I am the inventor, not the curator," Barnaby corrected, his hands flying up in exasperation. "And it's a security measure, not a design flair. You've ruined 10 years of antisocial engineering." "Nonsense," Penelope chirped, completely undeterred. She took a step into the workshop. Barnaby tried to warn her, but the words caught in his throat. Whoomp. Penelope had just stepped on the tripwire of tumultuous tangle-foam. A sticky, yellow, rapidly expanding foam immediately sprayed from a floor vent, engulfing her waist down in a dense, citrus-scented mess, a pressure-activated, biodegradable confinement agent. Penelope announced, struggling only slightly. "Highly effective for slowing an escape. But the citrus base suggests a low pH level, making it harmless to most textiles. Excellent choice for a non-lethal snare. It's a trap designed to glue a person to the floor for 3 days." Barnaby nearly screamed. "You are missing the point of the danger." "No, I'm celebrating the engineering of the defense," Penelope said, her cheerful energy overpowering the stickiness. She took a deep breath. "Sir, my name is Penelope Glimmerfoot, and I'm an archaeologist specializing in antique technological deterrence. Your property is a veritable goldmine of fascinating historical security measures. I simply must catalog them." Barnaby stared at her. Coated in citrus-scented foam, standing amidst the ruins of his carefully constructed solitude, she looked like a ridiculously enthusiastic canary-colored marshmallow. And yet she was talking about his work. Not his solitude, not his grumpiness, but the intrinsic value of his engineering. A small, unsettling feeling fluttered in his chest. It wasn't anger. It was a bizarre kind of admiration. She sees the craft, Barnaby realized, his fury momentarily muted. She sees the purpose of the trap, not just the danger. The tripwire of tumultuous tangle-foam is actually calibrated to a variable density, he found himself saying, against his better judgment. The citrus scent is actually a stabilizer for the nanobots in the polymer, a patent-pending invention of mine. Penelope gasped. "Nanobots! That's brilliant. The tensile strength must be incredible. Oh, Mr. Cogswell, you are a genius. May I borrow a tool to scrape this sample for analysis?" She pulled out a small antique trowel and took another step forward. Thwack! She stepped directly into the path of the swinging sledgehammer of sudden silence, a massive, iron pendulum designed to swing silently from the ceiling and flatten anything beneath it. The sledgehammer hit her squarely on the back of the head. Penelope went down in a cloud of dust and stale pumpernickel crumbs. Barnaby stood frozen. "I've killed the archaeologist. And she was the first person in years who appreciated my nanobots." He rushed forward, his annoyance instantly replaced by a wave of pure, horrified guilt. "Glimmerfoot, are you—" Penelope sat up immediately, rubbing the back of her head. "My stars. The kinetic force! Non-lethal, as I suspected, but the velocity is astounding. You clearly used a series of nested flywheels instead of a simple counterweight. Ingenious." She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. "Do you have the schematics for that one? I must record the flywheel ratios." Barnaby stopped, his hand hovering over her head. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a deep, confusing sense of awe. This woman was impervious to his best work. She didn't fear the traps. She celebrated them. "The ratios are 12-15-3, Barnaby mumbled, defeated. "And the hammer is coated in a thin layer of Teflon to reduce drag." "Teflon! Oh, you glorious gnome!" Penelope cried, successfully extricating herself from the foam and scrambling to her feet, her spectacles steaming with excitement. "You are truly a master of your craft." Penelope spent the next 3 hours cataloging the internal defenses of Barnaby's workshop. Barnaby, who usually guarded his workshop like a dragon guards its gold, found himself following her around, offering precise, technical details on the function of his traps. And this, the invisible incendiary interface, Barnaby explained, pointing to a perfectly ordinary wooden crate. It detects unauthorized contact via bioelectrical signature and releases a burst of extremely localized, highly flammable hydrogen gas. Fascinating. Penelope scribbled furiously in her notebook. And is the hydrogen non-toxic? A consideration for the accidental intruder? It's extremely toxic, Barnaby yelled. It's supposed to create a blinding flash fire. Ah, but the gas dissipates quickly, reducing long-term hazard, Penelope reasoned, smiling brilliantly. See? Thoughtful design. She then leaned too close to the crate, the edge of her backpack brushing the contact sensor. Whoosh! A sheet of blue flame instantly enveloped the crate, the backpack, and Penelope's left arm. Oh dear, Penelope said mildly, beating the flame out with her notebook. The fire was extinguished instantly, leaving a smudge of soot on her cheek. A momentary lapse in perimeter awareness on my part, but the activation speed, flawless. And the fire retardant coating on my backpack is holding up beautifully. A good design all around. Barnaby watched her, his face a mixture of terror and grudging respect. Most gnomes would be sobbing or suing. She was reviewing his work like a stern but fair professor. You are going to burn my workshop down, he stated flatly. Nonsense, Penelope said, wiping the soot away. I am simply stress testing your systems, and they are holding up remarkably well. She then noticed the perpetual motion generator still humming softly in the corner. Her eyes widened, losing the archaeologist's detached analysis and gaining the look of pure childlike awe. Is that the guilt-driven perpetual motion engine? She whispered. Barnaby puffed out his chest, forgetting his anger. Version 4.0, completely stable. Uses the residual energy from poor civic planning as an infinite power source. Penelope slowly approached the engine, her usual klutziness replaced by a reverent carefulness. The meshing of the gears, the harmonic frequency, it's perfect, Barnaby. Utterly perfect. The sincerity in her voice, the genuine, unreserved awe directed at his most intimate mechanical creation, struck Barnaby like the sledgehammer, but with a sweeter, much more dangerous force. He felt a wave of pride, validation, and a completely alien feeling that could only be described as warmth. She's beautiful when she talks about gears. Barnaby's brain screamed, overriding his caution. The sudden, intense surge of positive emotion, admiration mixed with a strange, giddy fondness, immediately triggered the closest dormant trap, the emergency self-destruct sequence on the perpetual motion engine. Beep, beep, beep. A frantic red light began flashing on the engine. A tiny digitized voice warned, "Destruct sequence initiated. 5 seconds to catastrophic disassembly." "The engine!" Barnaby cried, shoving Penelope aside. The warmth. "Your praise overloaded the internal anti-praise sensor." "An anti-praise sensor?" Penelope shrieked, scrambling behind a workbench. What kind of genius installs an anti-praise sensor? The kind of genius who hates human interaction. Barnaby snapped. 3 seconds. He snatched a wrench and plunged it into the mechanism, trying to find the manual override. The anti-praise sensor was designed to be impossible to disarm. You need to create a negative counter-emotion. Penelope yelled from behind the bench. A strong sense of offense. Something you truly despise. Barnaby thought frantically. What did he hate more than the idea of his engine exploding? He looked at the wreckage of his traps, at the messy, sticky foam, at the disaster magnet of a woman hiding behind his tools. I hate the fact that you are going to write this all down in a neat, folder-divided archaeological report. He screamed, channeling every drop of his antisocial, chaotic rage into the sheer orderliness of her profession. The wave of disdain for bureaucratic organization hit the engine at the same time his wrench hit the final gear. The negative emotional spike instantly polarized the energy field. Instead of exploding, the engine simply let out a final sputtering whoosh and stopped dead. It didn't disassemble. It was merely deactivated. Barnaby stood over the silent engine, panting. We did it. Your neatness saved my life. Penelope peeked out, soot on her cheek and foam on her trousers. And your utterly savage disdain for my administrative process saved yours. It seems we are perfectly balanced, Mr. Cogswell. The engine was inert, but safe. The workshop, however, was in chaos. The air was thick with the scent of hydrogen, citrus foam, and burnt tweed. You know, Barnaby began, picking up the fallen blueprints for the self-sealing sardine can. I'm usually fairly confident in my solitude, but you've managed to prove that every single one of my security measures is, in fact, an invitation to further catastrophe. Penelope emerged, dusting off her hands. Nonsense. They are brilliant. They simply require a gnome who doesn't respect the design's intent, which is what I specialize in. I treat your property like the ruins of a lost civilization, valuable, fascinating, and completely ignored by its current inhabitants. I am the current inhabitant, Barnaby grumbled, but he couldn't hide a slight, involuntary smile. Penelope sat on an overturned barrel and pulled out her notebook. Barnaby, I need to know why. Why the anti-praise sensor? Why the meticulous, multi-layered, non-lethal antisocial apparatus? Barnaby hesitated. It was the most personal question anyone had asked him in decades. Because, he admitted quietly, adjusting his spectacles, if I build things that are too good, people want them. They try to take them. If I build things that are dangerous and only function for me, then I get to keep them. And I get to be alone. My traps were never meant to keep people out. They were meant to keep the world away from my work. Penelope nodded, her bright, optimistic eyes suddenly serious and understanding. And that's why they failed against me. Because I didn't want to steal your work, Barnaby. I wanted to admire it. I wanted to share it. And since my motive was appreciation, your defenses, which are built entirely on the fear of greed, were powerless. Barnaby looked at her. The foam-stained, soot-smudged, sledgehammer-dented archaeologist had just articulated the core philosophy of his life's work better than he ever could. He felt a huge, complex surge of acceptance and intellectual connection. The nearest trap, the magnetic monocle minder, suddenly activated. It was a purely visual trap designed to temporarily blind an intruder. A powerful, focused ray of golden light shot out and encased Penelope in a blinding, harmless halo. The light! It's too much positive connection, Barnaby yelled, covering his eyes. We're going to trigger the localized lightning storm. Penelope laughed, the sound muffled by the blinding light. Then we need a massive, shared, unreserved feeling of contempt. Fast! Barnaby racked his brain for the deepest, most contemptible thought he could share with her. I think your shoes are terribly practical and aesthetically void, he shouted. And I think your beard is horribly flammable and utterly lacks structural integrity. Penelope shouted back. The dual, simultaneous spikes of personal aesthetic disdain were enough. The golden light snapped off. The lightning storm was aborted. They stood, panting, in the silence. We cannot exist within 10 feet of each other without creating an extinction-level event, Barnaby said. Defeated. Penelope walked up to him, a new, determined look on her face. Then we need to build a new system, Barnaby. A system designed not to keep the world out, but to keep the two of us stable. We need to design a trap that works with our chaos, not against it. She gestured around the workshop. Look at this mess. We created a stable temporal field with shared mediocrity. We halted an explosion with shared contempt. We are a perfectly balanced, dual-core engine, Barnaby. We just need to invent the emotional dampener. She reached out and picked up a piece of the ruined razor wire mesh. And I know where to start. Barnaby looked at the wreck of his life's work, then at the bright, smiling disaster of a gnome standing beside him, holding his ruined trap. He felt a wave of terrifying, exciting certainty. He wouldn't be alone anymore. He'd have an accomplice. The dampener will need a counterbalance coil made of pure, high-density cynicism, Barnaby mused, a slow, genuine grin spreading across his face. And it must be calibrated by a constant infusion of unreserved, historical optimism, Penelope added, matching his grin. They were no longer enemies. They were collaborators. And somewhere, deep in the Whisperwood, Barnaby's workshop was about to become the site of the greatest, most chaotic, and most perfectly engineered love story ever told. The world was about to find out that a grumpy gnome inventor and a klutzy archaeologist could only find perfect harmony in perfect chaos.